But so excited the time is here. We are so just really thankful that Dr. Dana Suskind was willing to give of her time this afternoon as our keynote speaker. Those of you that have read her first book, I know you understand how brilliant she is and how she writes in a way that is just so relatable to us. So introducing her, she is the founder and co-director of the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health, director of the Pediatric Cochlear Implant Program, and professor of surgery, pediatrics, and public policy at the University of Chicago. Truly, how does she have time to write as well? A recognized thought leader on the national stage, Dr. Suskind has dedicated her research and clinical life to optimizing foundational brain development and preventing early cognitive disparities and their lifelong impact. Her work is focused in particular on helping parents leverage their power as brain architects. Dr. Suskind is the author of Parent Nation, Unlocking Every Child's Potential, Fulfilling Society's Promise, and of course, the book we all know very well, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain. She's a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics and a fellow for the Council on Early Childhood. Her work has been profiled by numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, The Economist, Forbes, NPR, Freakonomics, and I'll tell you, I'm freaking out right now because she's an amazing speaker as well. So thank you, Dr. Suskind, for joining us. We can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like we've been talking about this conference for forever, and I only wish that we could all be in person. One of these days, I am going to get to back to Atlanta and to Georgia and be with everyone, but I am just absolutely thrilled to be here with you all. And, you know, I wish, in some ways, I mean, I'm thrilled that there are so many of you all around this table. I just wish it was a table that we could all like have a discussion. So forgive me if it sounds a little bit like a speech, but it really is meant to be. You all know this. You all are the change makers. And, you know, I feel so proud of my first book, but the truth is this second book is what needs to happen in our country to allow all the brain architects, parents, caregivers, childcare providers, all of us, the space to be able to build our children's brains. So I am going to try to share my screen. Wait, let's see. Can you tell me do you see the,
Yes, that looks good.
Perfect, perfect. So again, you know, and for those of you all who have heard me talk before, some of the stuff will sound familiar, some of it won't. And I just hope that this is a beginning of a dialogue. This is the work that you all have been pushing forward for so long. But I'm just thrilled to be here. You know, I want to start out though, you know, backing up, because I always say that, you know, actually today I just raced over from clinic where I was seeing patients, but, you know, it's important to understand that this is not my natural habitat. Believe it or not, I am most comfortable in the operating room and in the clinics with my cute little patients. Here are a few. That's because my day job is a pediatric physician, as a pediatric cochlear implant surgeon. I specialize in giving deaf patients and children cochlear implants, helping them access sound, hearing, and spoken language. And some of you all have probably, I wish I could see a show of hands, have probably seen those YouTube videos of children hearing for the first time. Believe it or not, it is even better in person, and it really, really never gets old. But I always say that your surgery might end, but that doesn't mean that your obligation to your patients end, just like it is for all of us. That your obligation ends when your patient does well, when they go on to live happier, healthier lives. And when your patients are children, the key to a happy, healthy life is the brain. In medical school, I fell in love with the brain. It's one of the reasons I became a pediatric ENT and a pediatric implant surgeon, because the truth is many people think that hearing is all about the ears, but the truth is it's all about the brain. And for me, that became extremely clear early in my practice when I started seeing dramatically different outcomes amongst my patients. with some of my patients excelling developmentally and others not at all, with some of them learning to talk, others not. The ability to hear, it turned out, didn't always unlock their full capacity to learn and thrive intellectually. It was an incredibly painful difference to see. And for me, compelled to understand the origins of these differences, and more importantly, what I could do to best help my patients, I took a journey far, far outside the operating room into the world of social sciences. And I was initially inspired by research that many of you all know, where my first book's title comes from, that found a stark difference in the amount of language, the actual number of words that a child was exposed to early in life. Researchers calculated that by the time a child reached their 4th birthday, that there was roughly 30 million words difference between those who heard a lot of language and those who heard very little. As I learned more, I realized that what I was seeing in my deaf patients really just mirrored the population at large, that in all children, the differences in early learning and early language environments correlate with later differences in achievement. Some of my patients were getting that essential experience with language, others were not. Of course, we know that the research that inspired me wasn't perfect, far from it. But I like to say that it was persuasive enough to pull me, a surgeon, out of the operating room. It gave me a critical place to start. And I really just think of the 30 million word study as a first sentence in what has become a robust and extensive literature that shows the ways in which language stimulate all parts of the child's brain. Believe it or not, I even audited a class in child development here at the U of C. And some of you all may be familiar with the science of early brain development. Many of you all were, but if you'll permit me, I'd like to just spend a few minutes to review it because it really undergirds so much of what Parent Nation is about. Because what the science reveals is both fascinating and at the same time impossibly simple. I like to say that the neuroscience tells us that there are many ways to parent a child. But there's only really one way to build that child's brain. And that's through nurturing interaction and protection from toxic stress. Research that you know so well. And we know this to be true, but there's an alarming disconnect between what we know that children's brains need and what we've actually done to meet those needs. In many ways, in supporting parents in meeting those needs. In many ways, we squander what I consider this incredible evolutionary gift, a short window of time when we can set up a child for success in life by nurturing their foundational brain development. And I like to sort of focus on this evolutionary gift just a little bit more because I think it is just so incredible because have many of you all have probably not thought about, I certainly didn't. Why is it that infants are born so helpless, right? They rely entirely on others to meet their needs. And the truth is humans are pretty unique in that way. After all, when you think about it, the horse, the zebra fowl is standing within minutes of birth and walking within 2 hours. The baby chimpanzees can cling to their mother's arms as she jumps from tree limb to tree limb. But on day one, the newly hatched, infant, not hatched infant, born infant, really comes out pretty underdone. So much so that pediatricians call the first 3 years of life the 4th trimester. I mean, for goodness sakes, newborns can't even hold their heads up for weeks. Walking and eating on their own takes a good year. And why is this? The leading explanation for this apparent developmental delay is that nature had to compromise. When humans began walking upright on 2 legs, the pelvises of females had to narrow. 40 weeks or so of pregnancy produces a baby's head that is at the upper limits of what a woman can pass through her birth canal. And we know as women, for those of you all out there who are women, we really don't want the head any larger. But the 40-week-old baby brain has a lot more growing to do. Unlike the animals that I mentioned before, whose brains are almost adult size, babies' brains are only 1/3 the adult-sized brain. And to be clear, the baby's brain is waiting for instruction guide for its formation, for finishing off the job, if you will. And the truth is, most of that important growth will occur in the first 2 to 3 years of life. Some 80 to 85% of the physical brain occurs during that time. It is an incredible gift. But for generations, our focus in terms of public attention and money has been K-12. This means that we've skipped over the earlier phase that is critical for laying the foundation for early learning. Our efforts come too late. Even preschool for all, which I think is incredibly important, is not nearly enough. And why is this? It's that neuroplasticity, the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life, is at its peak between birth and age 3. Brain circuits are a use it or lose it proposition. So while this brain is growing to its, rapidly in those 85% in those first 3 years of life, the brain is, through neuroplasticity, is making all these powerful connections. And while the brain remains plastic throughout our lives, there will never be so more than in the magical early years. The development that occurs during this time is breathtaking. 1 million new neural connections are happening every second. And the fact that we come into this world with a relatively underdeveloped brain and experience this protracted period of foundational brain development is an evolutionary gift. It offers so much opportunity for brain stimulation when the brain is at its most formative period. It is truly at the heart of why humans are the most intelligent, most creative, and most productive of all species. And neuroscience has revealed that to capitalize on this formative period of time, what do babies need most? They need rich, nurturing interaction, conversation, and protection from toxic stress. The conversation is often called serve and return. It's that back and forth that comes naturally to parents interacting with their children, to caregivers interacting with children. This nurturing interaction is powerful enough to help children move forward in 2 critical skills that will allow them to succeed in school and life. It delivers cognitive skills, those found on intelligence and aptitude tests, reading and writing, numeracy, etc. And it builds non-cognitive skills or soft skills like grit, executive function, etc. In other words, nurturing interaction builds the entire brain. Or as I like to say, just as milk feeds the growing body, talk and interaction nourish the growing brain. It was actually Adrian Weldon who gave me that amazing analogy. In 2010, when I launched the 30 Million Words Initiative, now the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health, my primary goal was to help ensure the healthy brain development for all children and give every child the ability to reach his or her potential intellectually and emotionally. Brain science pointed the way. Everything we designed and did was based on the fact that nurturing talk and interaction between caregiver and infant lay the foundation for brain development. It is and always has been about the power of parents. My team and I developed evidence-based programs and strategies that showed parents and caregivers the impact of talking to babies and young children. Those strategies became the theme of TMW: tune in, talk more, and take turns, or what we call the 3 Ts. We demonstrated that parents, through rich conversation, provided what is needed to unlock their children's potential, and that parents, as well as other caregivers, hold the key in the early years. All adults, no matter their level of education, wealth, or work, can master the essential techniques for optimally building a child's brain. This idea, a straightforward approach to what we know is a very complex problem, was intuitively appealing and a great success. I think that many hoped that it would be a silver bullet. But we all know there are no silver bullets in this world. But with that, I was proud to share the 3 Ts with my families through the TMW Center and through my first book, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain. My colleagues and I at the center conducted numerous studies. We found that indeed the strategies worked and the science that supports them is solid. The programs we promote can and often do improve the lives of children. But the truth is, as our research took us into more and more families' homes and into their lives, I realized just how much was being asked of families. Because our studies followed children from the first day of life into kindergarten, my team and I were getting to know many families up close and over time. Parent enthusiasm was thrilling. They embraced those 3 T's with gusto, tuning into their children, talking more as they went about their daily lives, taking turns with their children, encouraging them to participate in conversation. They wanted what all parents want, to get their children off to the best possible start. The only problem was the 3 T's only took parents so far. Real life would again and again and again intrude its ugly head. There were people like Randy at the top left who loved the fact that his love of baseball could help his son learn math, but had to keep down 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and had less than 30 minutes a day with his children. There was Sabrina, who gave up a well-paying job to care for her husband when he got sick, and whose family ended up spending over 2 years in a homeless shelter, where she raised her 2 children, the youngest still a baby, in a stressful and chaotic environment. Most searing of all was Michael and Kiana, whose life was upended when he was arrested for a crime he did not commit and sat in jail for over 5 years, awaiting a trial that quickly exonerated him. Everywhere I looked, I saw hurdles looming in front of mothers and fathers. I realized that with both sadness and resolve, that our programs can share with parents the knowledge and powerful skills to help build their children's brains. But our programs don't substantially change the day-to-day lives of parents who participate. The larger realities of a family circumstance, the work constraints, economic stressors, bad luck or injustices they're subject to, all matter as much as those 3 T's for building a child's brain. They either allow for the brain building power of talk to occur, or if they limit opportunities for engaging in the 3 T's, they stifle it like a weed choking off a garden. I was struck by this incredible disconnect between what we know children's brains need and what we've actually done to meet those needs, or more accurately, what we've done to allow parents and support parents in meeting those needs. At the very moment when parents and children could use that most support, when that support would have an outsized influence by strengthening those neural connections, our society leaves them on their own. This reality, of course, became painfully apparent during COVID-19, which left families reeling without any backup whatsoever. Parents were left on their own. Doing it all was unsustainable. The pandemic was like a powerful earthquake with lingering aftershocks, which showed us just how shaky our nation's infrastructure of supports for parents and therefore children really was. The bottom line is we've made it difficult for all parents to raise children and impossible for some. The fact that we are the only developed nation without paid family and medical leave is telling enough as it is. We spend less on early child care and education than any other developed nation on top of it, which results in a fragmented, not consistently high quality child care. This I think is one of the most powerful slides that shows, other than that we have no paid leave, that the average amount that other societies support parents in childcare, the average is $14,000 a year. Forget about Norway at $29,000. Look at the very bottom where the US is. We spend a miserly $500 per year. Approximately half of Americans we know live in childcare deserts, and only 10% of existing programs are even designed with developmental science in mind. And yet the majority of parents have to or want to go to work. So all of this realization really motivated me to write my latest book. Even though I promised I would never write a book, I felt compelled. I knew that the world didn't need another how-to book on what parents could do to build their children's brains, although my publisher would have loved it. Instead, I thought perhaps a book that can show how the brain science can inform a society that works for parents, not against them, that could help shift the narrative and make the case for a society that places all families at the center. I named this book Parent Nation, but I should be clear that when I say parents, I'm really talking about any loving caregiver. And as I was writing, I spoke to dozens of parents from all walks of life. I wanted this to be a story of all parents, and I was struck time and time again by how much they shared in common in the early years. Even parents who seemed on the surface to have nothing in common told me stories and shared thoughts, concerns, and fears that were incredibly similar to one another. Though their circumstances differed wildly, the fact that they were struggling to parent in the way they wanted to, in the way that they knew best for their child, that was a universal. I listened to one mom named Jade, who was deeply religious and believed that a mother's place was in the home, as she explained through tears that the lack of health insurance and inadequate family income set her back to work at Starbucks after her children were born, in spite of a dream of staying home. I got to know Talia, who had 2 babies while earning a PhD in psychology, but gave up a promising postdoctoral position when it became untenable to manage the demands of a job and 2 children under 4. The economics of paying for childcare no longer seemed to make sense. And Talia, in her own words, felt like she was failing in all parts of her life. Unlike Jade, she hoped to work outside the home, but could not. You know, we talk a lot about parental choice in this country. It's considered sacrosanct, as it should be. But really, what does choice mean when there are no options to be had? Jade didn't feel like she had a choice. Talia didn't feel like she had a choice, and neither do millions of parents across the country. And I suspect many of you all must hear similar stories from families, even within your own family. Families who just want to give their children the strongest, best possible start. Families who are playing by the rules, who are willing to sacrifice anything for their children, and yet in many cases are still struggling. And the tragic consequence of this means their children are not being given every chance to reach their potential, to maximize that evolutionary gift of foundational brain development that occurs early in life. Too often, we fail to see the connections between a parent's circumstance and struggles and the impact on their young children and their developing brain. But I am here to tell you something that you know intuitively. The potential of children depends on the support for their parents. So what does this mean? What can those of us in the room do to ensure parents receive the support they need to allow their children to thrive? Fortunately, neuroscience gives us a roadmap. Just as it tells us what to prioritize individually as parents, it shows us where to go societally. We can apply what we know from foundational brain development to inform a new way of approaching early childhood policies and practices. Children need enrichment, whether it be from their pediatrician or from you all. They need to be provided not just, here's the car seat, go forth, but with an understanding of how their young children's brains develop. They need protection from toxic stress that can impede their healthy development. And parents need the same thing in forms of social and economic forces that impede their ability to parent optimally. And there are so many public policies that can allow this to happen. Whether it be living wage, unemployment benefits, childcare, mental health and substance abuse services, all of these things are critical for supporting parents in their important role. But we must remember, with neuroscience of early childhood as the guide, the map for our society is clearly marked. But it's really critical to emphasize that parents remain the captains of their family ship, manning the helm. But every captain needs a crew to help ensure a safe voyage. And with that, we all have a role to play in being our families' crews, ensuring that parents have the support they need from public institutions, from employers, from local communities. You know, people like to say that it takes a village to raise a child, and I think there's huge merit in that. But I think an even more appropriate statement should be that takes a parent, and I mean parent in the largest way, to raise a child, and a society to support that parent in that critical role. The truth is, we've discussed the scientific case for doing so. The moral imperative is clear. The economic reasons are just as strong. But I like to point out that despite all this, it feels that we haven't moved as far forward as we can. I think any of us can look at what's happening at the federal level to see that as much movement hasn't occurred as we'd hope. So how can we create a society that truly puts parents and families at the center? And I look at a bright spot. We need to look no further than our nation's own recent past to see how a group of formerly isolated individuals can band together to achieve important and lasting change. In the mid-20th century, Americans over 65 were the poorest, most underserved segment of the US population. Of course, today it's children under 5. But back then it was the elderly. In addition to having limited retirement, older Americans face crippling healthcare costs and housing costs. So many of the things that I hear from the parents that I interviewed. According to a government study back then, 50% of the elderly lived below the minimum standards of decency. The AARP changed all of that. Thanks to the AARP, over the last 50 years, there are now no age group better served by society in government than the elderly. The poverty rates among Americans over 65 declined by almost 70%. The AARP continues to make advances in healthcare, prescription drugs, long-term care, et cetera. They were even part of the reconciliation, because they unite constituents across socioeconomic, political, racial, and ethnic divides by focusing on the rights that benefit everyone, and their success is legendary. And the truth is, just as our nation's seniors were in desperate need and entirely deserving of support decades ago, so too are parents of young children today. They need more. They should demand more out of our society. But where do we start? How do we move forward? The truth is, as important as what we fight for is how we go about fighting as a united front of parents and allies working together who recognize themselves in one another and who refuse the very notion that a child can be someone else's. Which is why my team, led by the incredible Yoli Flores, are leading a major campaign around the book and the building of parent villages. While I won't go into great detail, it includes a three-part campaign, both one that leverages social media, one that leverages the ground game of bringing together partners and communities to find out what changes need to be in their communities, and really trying to reach a broad coalition of parents and allies. And if you go to our parentnation.org, you will see so many free and downloadable resources. These are just a few pictures in the ground game that Yoli is leading, that brings groups together that engage around the ideas of building a parent nation. And just to be clear, what you all are doing day in and day out in my book is building a parent nation. So I just want to really be clear, this is about getting it outside of our echo chamber. The Building a Parent Nation toolkit includes book club discussions, a dedicated curriculum and facilitator guide, and standalone resources that are there for anyone to use. These are just a few of our partners and a few of what we are doing, but I want to skip over only because I know I've gone over my time allotment, but really just to say that, you know, I can't reiterate enough that the potential of children really relies on the support for their parents. You know that, we know that. And I truly believe that a parent nation is what we need, because if all children of all races and ethnicities are to flourish and grow up and really participate equally in the economy and civic life of our nation, if all genders are able to participate equally as well, society must attend to and allow for the healthy brain development from birth. The way to do this is by building a parent nation, a society that really puts children and families at the center, seeing it not just as a heartwarming thing to do, but an essential and a key driver of how we operate, fuel our economy, elect our officials, democratize opportunity, and really carry our society forward on our collective shoulders. Ultimately, it is how we grant the promise of their innate promise. And with that, I want to thank you so much and open it up.
Available. I do see one question in there, but if others have some questions for Dr. Suskind, we do have some time this afternoon. One is a question from Jordan, and she asks, how do you think school-based childcare centers for teen mothers would help break the cycles of abuse and trauma? That's a big question, Dr. Suskind, so it might not be able to tackle it all.
Yes. But I think it really gets to the heart of what is necessary. It is how we start breaking not just the cycle, but really support the young teen who is still herself learning and growing and deserves to have her full life ahead of her. And also at the same time, knowing that, two-generation approaches are critical, not just to breaking the, cycle of poverty, but really allowing everybody to flourish. And knowing that in those early years, that child needs the nurturing interaction, both from parent and from the larger societal supports. I know that was a very a short answer to a pretty complex issue, but I couldn't say enough that this is a critical part of it. So
very good. And then another question is, what can we do to influence public policy, build awareness for leaders and decision makers?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a lot of the thinking that I've been doing. As I mentioned in the talk, look, we've got the scientific case that is, if we didn't have one more scientific study, if I didn't do one more scientific study, if my colleagues didn't do one more scientific study, we know the importance of the early years. We know the importance of caregivers. We know what needs to happen, right? If we didn't have one more economic case, that businesses would benefit from it, that our economy needs to support early child care, not just for the child, but for parents, especially mothers. So we've got the economic and scientific case. What is clear is, as you say, we don't have the public will or the political will. And I used to think, I think it's about building awareness, and this may sound jaded, but I think the people in power know this. They just don't want to pay for it. Was that clear enough? I think that we can continue to convince, but I think people get it, right? If they didn't, they wouldn't be spending so much time with their own children in the early years. What I don't think we have is that collective identity, the collective voice that helps move policy, right? I just want to point out, like the AARP, which I think is a brilliant model, understands that to advocate on behalf of this large demographic, we can't, people are busy, parents are busy, people don't, it's great, people will march in the streets once or twice, but that's not a sustainable thing. But what the AARP does is that it brings this contingency together. They're almost like a business where instead of the money going to somebody's pocket, it goes towards advocating, lobbying. They spent $300 million in the last 20 years lobbying on behalf of the elderly. That is why we still have Social Security and Medicare. That's why the elderly, the poverty rates are so much lower, which is awesome, which is brilliant. And in that same way, I think that the early childhood space would so benefit from that as well. I think that in some ways we've siloed ourselves off, even in the early childhood space. Is it childcare? Is it paid leave? Is it abuse and neglect? Is it literacy? Is it this? When it's really, it's all one thing. And if we could find, I'm saying this out, we're trying to get this out into the ether. We need an organization that helps not just bring it together, but no margin, no mission. I think that they have large purchasing power, right? And in that same way as the ARP who sells insurance and the like, maybe something like that, so that we can have people, the advocacy happening all the time. So that was another long answer, but something I feel strongly about.
I have to say, you in the book, how you explained so many of these things, like how you went back in time and talked about the evolution of the education system and how we are not up to date with societies today when you look at how the educational system was developed. So it was really very intriguing. We have time for a couple more questions.
Sorry.
That's okay. I know you're
No.
you might have to put your other hat on for a moment.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's not the hospital. It's not the hospital.
It's not the hospital. Here's another question from actually Georgia Center for Child Advocacy. Their prevention team is asking this. But what do employers need to do to step up to support the parents in their workforce to thrive as parents? And I know this can be a double jeopardy for some of the small organizations where bandwidth and capacity can really be a constrictor as parents are trying to navigate the role of their professional life and taking care of their family. So any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think, not the funny thing, but I really have great hopes around the role of business, and that they can both be part of the solution as well as push forward change. Because, with the great resignation of especially mothers, of children between 0 and 5, it impacts their bottom line. And, but you bring up two important things. I think from what can business themselves do, I think the first and most important thing is realize that, their employers are also parents, and, sort of tear down that sort of ideal worker sort of standpoint, and understanding that things like flexibility and reliability go a long way to allowing parents, especially mothers, juggle both roles. And, for organizations that have large resources, it's great. If you're Facebook, or a multi-billion-dollar company, you can say, I'm providing paid leave, I'm providing childcare. Like, all of those things are great. And if organizations have the resources, absolutely. But you bring up a good point. I mean, many of the businesses in America are small businesses, right? And when you say, it's on you, you're also sometimes, putting on the shoulders of a small mom and pop organization that's just trying to stay afloat, which is why also understanding that the role of society and policies play an important role too, because it's easy to say, oh, you know what, all businesses should have paid leave for X period of time, when that could put them under. So I think that there's a role for both, but I think businesses can be an important ally in the fight for better early childhood infrastructure and supports.
I think that's where you're charged with creating the parent villages. And we had a workshop at our conference today, actually, on parent leadership and the role with their lived experience. When we think of these policies being developed, when you think of small mom and pop organizations possibly creating think tanks around what the needs are of their employees and the needs of the employer, and again, finding that common ground. And you talk about finding that common ground in your book, and how we all want the same thing, but how we get there might look differently. And those are the things we've got to massage out. We'll do one more question. I like this one, Cynthia Clark. Who do you think is the foremost authority on poverty right now? She felt it was Ruby Payne in college, but what are your thoughts?
Oh God, I'm taking the fifth. There's so many important people doing it, whether it be from economics, from child development. Don't ask me. I pass. You can, Cynthia, you can email me directly. I love that. I love that. I know exactly that my words will be used against me because you know you're going to miss that really important person. So, but no, you know what? And guess what? I'm going to actually, I have an answer. I think so often we imbue, who is the greatest authority? Who is the figurehead? The truth is, each and every one of you all are experts. I know we want sort of magical science or magical thinking that some people have the answers. No, I'm sorry. Nobody actually has. We know the answers, just like we know the answers to some of the society's thorniest issues. That's the problem. We actually know. I mean, right? We put so much stock on, these technological innovations. And look, I do tech in my center, which I'm very excited about. We can get to Mars, we can get to the moon, we can do AI. These are all awesome things. But unless it fundamentally changes and improves the quality of life for the mass of humanity, that's the real question. I mean, these aren't complex things. We know how to get water to people, to, food insecurity. That's, not we know the answers. So Cynthia, you all are the experts. We just got to get people to do the right thing. So
Collectively come together.
Exactly.
Dr. Suskind, thank you so much again for joining us today. I am putting the Parent Nation website in the chat box again. I encourage you to go out there. The Parent Village toolkits are free. They're downloadable. They have ongoing free training that are available nationally and virtually. So when you look at that from a small nonprofit standpoint, it's a win for all of us that we can take this, we can read the book, but then you provided the action items to go with it. Another unique thing that the state of Georgia has done is we've also partnered with Dr. Suskind. Many of you are aware of our inclusive conversations. They help bring to life conversations, difficult conversations, but to have with our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues. Thank you, Deborah, for putting that in the chat. So just kind of want to highlight that too as well, that tool as well. And then just 50 of you, based on the leaderboard, are going to be able to be mailed come this week. And I don't think you can see it, the wonderful book, and enjoy reading it and gleaning from it. And again, coming back to the website and looking at ways of how we can work together to build this parent nation.